Hi there, I'm Megan, and this is the story of how I built our family business from the ground up, only to be called just a tech girl by my own mother. The next day, everything I thought I knew shattered. How does a family erase the person who held it together? Before we dive in, have you ever felt invisible in your own home? Are you listening late at night or during your morning coffee? Tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below. The ballroom smelled faintly of waxed floors and overripe flowers, and for a second, standing there at the threshold, I hesitated. I had spent so many nights dreaming of a moment like this. A celebration of the company we had built from scraps and stubbornness. A place where maybe, just maybe, they would finally see me. I smoothed my black dress, the one I'd worn only twice before, and stepped inside. Tulsa wasn't a big city, but tonight the hotel ballroom looked grand enough. Gold banners hung from the ceiling, and a giant screen flashed images of DOS Tech's journey, from a dusty old repair shop to a $2 million company. A journey I had lived, fought for, bled for. Lorraine spotted me first. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, but I returned it anyway. Hopeful. Naive, maybe, but hopeful. I made my way to a table near the stage, greeted a few familiar faces, shook a few hands. Somewhere inside, I still believed this night would be different. I still believed I mattered. The lights dimmed slightly, and Lorraine took the stage with a glass of wine in her hand. She cleared her throat, her voice wrapping the room in a velvet hush. "We wouldn't be here without family," she began. "Walter, who built this dream with his bare hands, and of course, Alessa, the future of DOS Tech." A ripple of applause. I clapped too, my palms tingling with cold. "And Megan?" Lorraine said, her voice lilting casually, almost laughing. "Well, she's our brilliant little tech girl, always behind the scenes tinkering away." There was a polite chuckle from the audience. Someone even nodded approvingly. I felt my face freeze into a practiced smile, every nerve in my body taut as piano wire. Behind my ribs, something delicate cracked. I gripped the edge of my chair, willing myself not to move, not to react. But inside, a slow, cold burn began. When the official commemorative speech started, I braced myself again. Slide after slide rolled across the screen. Walter shaking hands with the mayor, Alessa posing with awards, Lorraine laughing at ribbon-cutting ceremonies. I scanned each photo instinctively, searching for myself. I found flashes. A sleeve here, the edge of my hair there, carefully cropped out, edited, erased. My fingerprints all over the foundation of this company, wiped clean as if I had never existed at all. Lorraine's voice droned on, praising Walter's vision, Alessa's ambition. Megan wasn't mentioned again. It felt surreal, like watching your own funeral while still breathing, as if I had become invisible in real time, pixel by pixel. I thought of the years spent coding until my fingers cramped, the contracts I closed alone in fluorescent-lit conference rooms, the mistakes I cleaned up in silence before anyone could notice. Maybe I was never really one of them. Maybe I was just the scaffolding they needed until their real masterpiece was ready. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. No more blind loyalty. No more waiting for recognition that would never come. A quiet, fierce promise bloomed in my chest. I picked up my champagne glass. My hand was steady now. As the final applause filled the room, I lifted the glass, but not toward the stage. I toasted silently to myself, to the girl who had built an empire only to be written out of its story. My gaze locked onto Lorraine, and inside my head, the words were clear, sharp, irrevocable. "You just started a war you don't even see coming." The room still hummed with polite conversations and the clinking of glasses when the junior staff member approached me. I thought maybe they were coming to congratulate me, maybe to direct me to my family's table at last. Instead, they gestured toward a table at the very back of the hall, a table reserved for vendors, junior associates, and distant acquaintances. I paused for half a second, caught between pride and humiliation, then forced a smile and nodded. I weaved my way through the crowd, careful not to brush shoulders with anyone, careful not to draw attention to the fact that I was being quietly exiled. From my seat, I could see the main table, Lorraine in a violet dress laughing a little too brightly, Walter leaning back in his chair, nodding as Alessa cracked a joke. They were lit perfectly by the warm overhead lights, the center of everything, as if that had always been the plan. A young marketing assistant I barely knew offered me a polite smile from across the table. I smiled back, grateful she didn't know me well enough to realize the insult. I ate mechanically, the food tasteless on my tongue. I listened to the distant echoes of conversation I wasn't part of, the roaring applause that didn't reach me, and I realized, with a sharp clarity, that this wasn't a mistake. It had never been a mistake. Lorraine caught my eye once across the room. She smiled. It was the kind of smile you give a distant guest, not a daughter. I pushed the food around my plate, swallowed the bitterness clawing its way up my throat. My chair felt too big, the room too bright, the air too thin. After dessert, when most guests were milling around, Lorraine drifted toward me, her smile syrupy sweet. "Megan, can we have a quick word?" she asked, her hand barely touching my elbow. I followed her out of the ballroom without a word, through a narrow hallway lined with framed photos. Photos where my presence had been edited, minimized, forgotten. In a quiet corner near the service entrance, Lorraine turned to me, her face full of manufactured concern. "For efficiency," she began, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle on her sleeve, "we've decided to streamline client communications." I frowned slightly, the first crack in my mask. "Going forward," she continued, "all client access will be routed through Alessa. It just makes more sense for the image we're building." She handed me a printed memo, the kind that looked official but smelled of manipulation. My eyes scanned the page. It said that I, Megan Doss, had agreed to the transition of authority over client management systems. I had signed no such thing. I looked up at her. Lorraine's face was an artful blend of sympathy and authority, the kind of look you reserve for someone who no longer has a say. My heart twisted, a knot of betrayal pulling tighter and tighter. I said nothing, just nodded once, short and sharp, and walked away with the paper in my hand, the words blurring as my fingers crumpled it unconsciously. Outside, the parking lot was nearly empty. I climbed into my car, the leather seats still holding the day's warmth, and sat there in the dark. The dashboard clock blinked 11:03 p.m. in soft blue. I opened my laptop on the passenger seat, logged into the company system. My access was already downgraded. The systems I had built, protected, nurtured, now off limits to me. I stared at the screen, at the cold, polite message that read, "Access denied." I leaned back against the headrest, closed my eyes. "If they want a war," I whispered into the emptiness, "they'll have it." Monday morning sunlight poured across the floor of DOS Tech's open office, throwing long shadows over empty desks. I slid into my seat, still carrying the hollow ache from Saturday night's so-called celebration, still nursing the growing silence lodged behind my ribs. The moment my laptop woke up, my inbox exploded with new messages, congratulations, smiley faces, chatter I wasn't part of. One subject line froze me mid-sip of my coffee. Exciting new leadership development. It wasn't from HR, it wasn't even from the senior team, it was from Alessa. I clicked. Effective immediately, Alessa Rayburn had secured and closed his first independent contract, a minor regional supply chain, but enough to send a message. No heads up, no consultation, just a loud, polished announcement like he had single-handedly dragged the company out of the dirt. Across the office, I heard laughter. Hands clapped Alessa's back as he preened in his brand-new tailored blazer, drinking in the validation like it was vintage champagne. The contract attachment was open on my screen. I scrolled. I saw the errors immediately. Terms that guaranteed steep penalties if targets weren't met. Timelines that were practically fantasy. It was reckless, sloppy. For a moment, my fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could fix it quietly, protect the company, protect them from themselves. I leaned back instead, folding my hands over my stomach, feeling the weight settle there. No. Let them taste the mess they made. For the first time in years, I made a conscious decision not to save them, not to run in and patch the cracks they refused to acknowledge even existed. I minimized the window and smiled thinly to myself. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed. A text from Lorraine, short and sweet. "Family dinner tonight, 7 p.m. just us. My stomach nodded immediately, but I went anyway. Appearance mattered in families like ours, even when the foundations were rotting from within. The house smelled like lemon-scented polish and nostalgia. Memories clung to the corners, faded and brittle. Dinner was baked chicken, overcooked green beans, the same tired wine they pulled out for holidays. We sat stiffly, utensils clicking too loudly against porcelain. Lorraine talked about community awards. Walter reminisced about the early days of the shop. Alessa joked about how different corporate life was compared to the old hands-on days. Then it shifted. Walter set his fork down with a clink, wiped his mouth with slow deliberation, and said, "You know, Meg, the business is really looking toward the future now." I didn't respond. I just kept cutting my chicken into smaller and smaller pieces. "It needs someone solid, stable, with the right image," he added, not meeting my eyes. Lorraine smiled benignly, and Alessa reached for the butter like none of it mattered. There it was. The subtext didn't even try to disguise itself. In their eyes, stability meant marriage, children, a polished, predictable life that didn't include a woman in her 30s who had the audacity to prioritize career over the expected script. It hit harder than if they'd shouted it, deeper than if they'd slammed a door. They didn't even think I was fit for the company I built. I pushed my plate away, appetite dead, my chest tightening against the walls closing in. After dessert, the obligatory pie I didn't touch, I stood to leave, kissed my mother's cheek out of habit, nodded at Walter, let Alessa's flippant, "Later, Meg," roll off my back like dirty water. Outside, the air was sharp with cold. I pulled my coat tighter around me and walked slowly to my car. Sitting behind the wheel, I stared at the dashboard, listening to the soft hum of the heater struggling against the night. No matter how much I built, I would never be enough for them. As I pulled onto the empty street, tires crunching over loose gravel, a vow formed, silent but solid. If they thought they could erase me this easily, they weren't paying nearly enough attention. The office was emptying out by the time I shut down the last debugging session. A few chairs scraped across the floor, hurried goodbyes drifted through the quiet, but I stayed, letting the artificial light soak into my skin like a second layer. Early spring in Tulsa was unpredictable, much like everything else these days. The afternoon sun flickered against the windows as clouds rolled in, heavy and uncertain. I tried to focus, but the memory of the family dinner clung to me like a second skin, unshakable, too familiar. I typed commands into the system, updating modules, checking security patches, doing the invisible work no one clapped for. Somewhere deep inside, I knew none of it mattered to them anymore. No amount of flawless code could compete with Alessa's empty promises and well-practiced smiles. A tap at my door jolted me from the screen. Walter leaned in, casual, holding 2 coffee cups. "Mind if I join you for a minute?" he asked, already stepping inside. I closed my laptop halfway, bracing. We sat across from each other, steam curling up between us. He didn't speak immediately, just stared out the window at the lowering sky. "You know, Megan," he said eventually, voice low and careful, "there's more to life than work." I kept my face neutral. "A woman like you," he continued, "you should think about settling down. Marriage, maybe kids, before it's too late." I blinked once, twice, bit the inside of my cheek until the metallic taste of blood tinged my mouth. He meant it as advice, as love, twisted and misplaced. They built DOS-Tech on my back, and now they wanted me to step aside because I had dared to invest my prime years into building it instead of birthing heirs. I smiled thinly, the kind of smile you give a stranger on a crowded street, and nodded. Let him think he'd been heard. That evening, as the office darkened further, I heard Alessa's voice drift from the conference room. "No worries, man. We'll have the new system ready by end of next month. Piece of cake." I froze. The client he spoke to was known for strict deadlines and harsher penalties. What he promised was impossible, a reckless boast built on nothing but ego. My stomach twisted into knots. I stepped away before they could see me. Better to let it unfold naturally now. Better to let them dig their own graves. The next morning, the explosion arrived. Emails, voicemails, furious messages from the client demanding answers, threatening to terminate the contract entirely. Alessa was nowhere to be found. Lorraine was too busy saving face. I drafted a detailed report, outlined potential solutions, and sent it straight to Lorraine's desk. Hours passed. No response. Finally, she called me in, not to thank me, not to ask for my help, but to inform me gently but firmly that the situation reflected poorly on my training methods, not on Alessa's incompetence, not on their short-sightedness, on me. The meeting ended with a curt nod, and I walked out carrying more than paperwork. I carried the final proof I had long suspected, but tried so hard to deny. There would be no apology, no acknowledgement, no turning back. That night, driving home along the empty streets of Tulsa, headlights cutting long ribbons through the dark, I kept my hands steady on the wheel. The city blurred around me, the skyline swallowing my memories. If they wouldn't see me when I was building, they would damn well notice when everything started to fall apart. The conference room felt colder than usual, the kind of sterile chill that seeped through even the most determined armor. I took a seat along the far wall, laptop balanced on my knees, while Lorraine stood at the head of the table, her smile brittle, her posture perfect. The announcement came quickly without ceremony. "We've identified some major system failures," Lorraine said, voice carrying easily over the clinking of coffee cups and restless chair shuffles. "Unfortunately, many stem from legacy issues in the coding structure." A dozen heads turned subtly in my direction. She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. The old anger prickled just beneath my skin, but I kept my face neutral, my hands folded neatly. I stared at the screen in front of me, pretending to read, as the weight of their avoidance filled the room like smoke. I knew better than anyone that Alessa had been the one scrambling, rewriting patches without supervision. But the story was already being spun. Megan, the out-of-touch tech girl, whose outdated work was now putting the company at risk. After the meeting adjourned, I asked Lorraine quietly if we could review the code together. A simple, professional offer. She waved a manicured hand and said, "No need, Megan. We've got it under control." Veiled contempt wrapped in a silky tone. A dismissal so effortless it almost made me laugh. Back at my desk, I opened the system archives and traced the error logs myself. The timestamps told the truth. Alessa's rushed updates, his sloppy overrides. None of it mattered. Not when perception had already been weaponized against me. Around 4 p.m., my phone buzzed. A message from one of our biggest partners. "Hey Megan, just wanted to check in. Heard some things about DOS tech side slipping lately. Everything okay?" The words blurred for a second as I blinked against the sudden heat in my eyes. It was happening, not just inside these walls, but out there too. The rot was spreading. Later that evening, after most of the staff had gone home, I sat quietly at my desk, replaying the day's slow unraveling. My hands moved on autopilot, organizing files I no longer had any claim over. I didn't notice Lorraine at first, didn't realize she had slipped into the room with two partners until their laughter cut across the silence. I stayed hidden behind the frosted glass, listening. Soft, calculated words floated to me. "She's brilliant, of course," Lorraine was saying, "but a little resistant to change. We're bringing in new energy, you understand. Fresh vision. Fresh vision." As if I were mold on the walls. The partners nodded politely. One murmured something about understanding the need for evolution in leadership. My fingers curled into fists. I waited until they left. Waited until the elevator dinged closed behind them. Then I gathered my things, walking out into the night with my chin lifted, my body stiff against the gnawing anger clawing under my ribs. Silence had once been a shield, a way to survive. Tonight, it felt like complicity. Sitting alone in the dark of my car, engine ticking softly in the cool air, I pulled out my phone. My hands didn't tremble as I typed the text. "How hard is it to separate IP ownership if things turn ugly?" I sent. And for the first time in a long while, I smiled. The email hit my inbox like a cold slap. "Meeting cancellation notice," the subject line read. The sender, one of our largest partners, the kind that didn't make casual decisions. I clicked it open, half dreading, half expecting what it would say. Concerns about internal management and consistency. A polite kiss of death wrapped in corporate language. I didn't have to wonder where it came from. The seeds had been planted carefully, and I knew exactly whose hands had pressed them into the soil. I tried, of course. I picked up the phone, dialed the partner directly. There was a pause when he answered, the kind you only hear when someone is calculating what they're allowed to say. His voice was clipped, rehearsed. Decisions were made based on long-term strategy, he said. The kind of sentence that ended conversations, not opened them. I thanked him anyway, hung up, and stared out my office window, watching the world outside spin on without me. It didn't matter how clean my code was, how many hours I had bled into DOS tech. They had decided who I was now, and perception was heavier than truth. The quarterly company party loomed, a celebration we used to cherish when we were a family, when every new client felt like a shared secret, a battle won together. Now it felt like a trial. I thought about skipping it, thought about staying home, pretending I was sick, that I had other plans. But in the end, I went, because I wasn't ready to let them rewrite the story without me in the room to witness it. The community center was decked out in balloons and silver streamers, tables arranged in neat rows, an open bar buzzing with nervous energy. I hovered near the back, sipping flat ginger ale, the taste sour on my tongue. When Lorraine took the stage, my heart hammered against my ribs, a warning drum. She smiled wide, dazzling, and began her speech with easy authority. "We are thrilled to announce," she said, "a new chapter in DOS Tech's leadership." The room hushed. Alessa Rayburn will be taking on an expanded leadership role effective immediately. Applause erupted. Loud, enthusiastic. My name wasn't mentioned. Not even a thank you for the decade I had given up. I watched Lorraine beam with pride, watched Alessa bask in the artificial glow he hadn't earned, watched the faces in the crowd, some uncertain, some relieved to be part of a story bigger than themselves. I set my drink down carefully, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes that didn't quite meet mine. And then I smiled, polite, small, razor sharp. I walked toward the exit without saying a word. No outburst, no begging. Just a quiet step away from a stage that was never built for me in the first place. Outside, the night was cool against my burning skin. I leaned against my car, breathing in the heavy air, letting the false applause fade behind me. They wanted me invisible? Fine. I would make myself unforgettable instead. I pulled my phone from my pocket, glanced at the screen once, then locked it again. Let them celebrate. The ground they stood on was already crumbling beneath their feet. The lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the grand ballroom. I stood at the back, pressed against the wall, fingers locked around a lukewarm glass of sparkling water. On the massive screen at the front, the story of DOS Tech began to unfold in glossy, curated snapshots. Walter cutting the ribbon on our first office. Lorraine shaking hands with local dignitaries. Alessa posing with our earliest clients. I waited for myself to appear, some trace, even a flicker, but slide after slide passed without me. Cropped edges where my hand once rested on a shoulder. Wide shots meticulously framed to leave me standing just outside the frame. The pit in my stomach grew heavy. Sick. Around me, guests shifted uncomfortably. Some glanced my way, quickly looking away. Others just pretended not to see the woman they had watched sacrifice so much, now scrubbed clean from the memory they celebrated. Lorraine took the stage to thunderous applause, radiant beneath the golden lights. "We built DOS Tech with vision and dedication," she said, voice smooth as silk. Walter, with his entrepreneurial spirit. Alessa, with his fresh, dynamic leadership. Her eyes flickered over the crowd, never landing on me. No mention, no acknowledgement, not even a placeholder sentence. I clenched my jaw until it ached, willing my face to remain composed, willing my heart to stay silent even as it thundered in my chest. In that moment, under that sparkling canopy of empty praise, I saw it clearly for the first time. I was never part of their family story. I was never meant to be celebrated. I was a tool, a temporary bridge to a future that never included me. I stayed just long enough to be polite, clapped when appropriate, smiled when cameras turned, then I slipped out into the night. The drive home blurred into a smear of headlights and unshed anger. By the time I stumbled into my apartment, the silence was deafening. I poured myself a glass of cheap wine, barely tasting it as I stared at my laptop glowing softly from the desk. Without thinking, I opened the folder marked Legal. Old incorporation documents, Contracts. Boring, dry paperwork that had once felt like promises. My fingers moved automatically, scrolling, scanning, and then I found it. Buried in the original agreements, under a mountain of revisions and addendums, was a simple, unaltered clause. The core software, the engine that powered DOS-Tech's meteoric rise, was licensed exclusively through Innovate Solutions LLC. My company, my name, not DOS-Tech, not Lorraine or Walter or Alessa. They had tried to erase me from their history, but they had forgotten where the real foundation was poured. A slow, clean smile stretched across my face, the first real smile in what felt like years. Not out of malice, not even out of revenge, out of pure, unshakable clarity. I closed the laptop gently, savoring the quiet power humming in my veins. They erased the wrong person, I whispered into the stillness. I opened a blank email draft, typed the subject line without hesitation. Termination of license agreement. Midnight crept across Tulsa, pressing its weight against my apartment windows. I sat cross-legged on the worn rug in the living room, my laptop perched precariously on the coffee table, a half-empty glass of wine forgotten by my side. The old legal documents blinked back at me, stark in their clarity. Somewhere along the tangled web of the past few months, Lorraine had made her move, quietly attempting to amend the IP agreements, to strip my name, to erase the last thread tethering me to what I built. But she had failed. The original documents, the ones filed before DOS-Tech had a logo or an office or a future, still stood firm. Innovate Solutions LLC owned the core software. Not DOS-Tech, not Lorraine. Me. The betrayal settled deep inside me, heavy but almost familiar now. It didn't surprise me anymore. It validated every silent instinct that had twisted my gut for months. I leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling where the paint had begun to crack, mapping the future in those tiny fractures. Enough waiting, enough bleeding out in silence. I pulled my laptop closer, heart pounding a slow, steady drumbeat against my ribs. I opened a new email, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Drafting the notice took minutes. Termination of licensing agreement, Innovate Solutions LLC and DOS-Tech. Formal, precise, unapologetic. I attached copies of the legal contracts, the original ones, and the detailed summary of breaches. I blind copied our major clients, ensuring they saw the truth before the lies could spread again. My thumb hovered over the send button. Images flashed unbidden behind my eyes. The empty table at the gala, the cropped photos, Walter's careful words about stability, Lorraine's smile, hollow and cruel, all the birthdays spent alone, all the weekends sacrificed, all the years stitching together a future they never intended to share with me. They thought loyalty meant silence. They were wrong. I pressed send. The email slipped away into the digital current, carrying with it the last pieces of the life they tried to hold over me. A strange calm settled over my chest, heavy but not suffocating. A clean weight, the kind you choose to carry, not one forced upon you. I closed the laptop slowly, feeling the gravity of the moment. Outside, the city lights flickered faintly, distant and indifferent. Life would continue tomorrow, with or without the version they had tried to write for me. My phone buzzed against the coffee table, a sharp vibration that rattled the glass. Lorraine's name flashed across the screen. I stared at it for a long moment, the silence stretching between us heavier than any conversation we could ever have. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Let them scramble. Let them patch the cracks with hurried words and false apologies. I whispered to the empty room, to the ghosts of loyalty and obligation that no longer lived here. Let's see who's left when the lights come back on. The morning light seeped through the half-drawn curtains, painting soft golden streaks across the wooden floor of my apartment. I sat at the kitchen table, cradling a cup of lukewarm coffee, when my laptop chimed with a new email. Lorraine's name in the subject line caught my eye before the words did. Their lawyer proposing a meeting, a private settlement discussion, a thinly veiled attempt to stitch together what had already unraveled. I stared at the screen for a long time, weighing the familiar ache in my chest. Part of me wanted to delete it, pretend it had never arrived. Another part, quieter, steadier, knew I needed to see this through, if only for myself. The law office was neutral territory. Glass walls, bland carpeting, the scent of overbrewed coffee lingering in the air. I sat at the polished table, feeling strangely detached as Lorraine and her lawyer entered. Lorraine looked thinner, the brittle kind of thin that comes from stress and desperation. She smiled when she saw me, but it didn't touch her eyes. "We're offering full reinstatement," the lawyer began smoothly. "Megan's contributions will be formally recognized, a leadership position reinstated, and of course, the licensing agreement reactivated." Lorraine nodded along, as if this generous rewriting of history was enough to erase the past months of betrayal. I listened without interrupting, letting their words pile up like sand against a seawall already cracking. When they finished, I simply smiled. A real smile this time. Small, sure. "No thank you," I said. Lorraine blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity of it. I gathered my bag, stood up, and left without looking back. Outside, the Oklahoma sun hung low and golden over the city skyline. I walked slowly down the sidewalk, breathing in the cool air, letting the weight slip off my shoulders one step at a time. I realized something as I rounded the corner away from the office. I didn't need to win against them. I didn't need revenge. I had already won the only thing that mattered: freedom. The next weeks moved in a blur of quiet determination. I finalized the paperwork for my new consulting firm, a company built from experience, from resilience, from the lessons they had taught me by accident. Clients who had once hesitated now reached out eagerly, eager to work with the mind behind the systems they had always trusted, not the faces who had claimed the credit. The first time I unlocked the door to my new office, a modest space in a shared building downtown, I stood in the doorway for a long moment, letting the silence wrap around me. It wasn't grand. It wasn't flashy. It was mine. Sometimes, when I worked late into the evening, I felt a flicker of loneliness, the kind that whispers about birthdays forgotten, about holidays spent half smiling across cold tables. But then a new client would call, a small business owner, grateful for advice. A new partnership formed not out of obligation, but out of respect. And the loneliness faded into something else: pride. On a crisp afternoon, I found myself walking past the old DOS-Tech building. The windows were dark now. A large red "For Sale" sign leaned crookedly in the front window, the once proud logo peeling at the corners. I paused on the sidewalk, hands stuffed deep into my jacket pockets. I touched the Lucky Charm bracelet on my wrist, the same one I had worn through all those endless nights coding, dreaming, believing. Some things you build not to own forever, but to prove you could. I smiled quietly, turned away, and kept walking toward the future, waiting just beyond the next corner. Looking back, I realized that sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones we never thought we needed to learn. Not every betrayal is loud. Sometimes it happens quietly, through smiles, through silence, through the gentle closing of a door you built with your own hands. If I could tell my younger self one thing, it would be this: your worth is never measured by the spaces others refuse to make for you. It's measured by the courage it takes to build new doors, new paths, and new beginnings. Freedom isn't always loud either. Sometimes it's just a quiet decision to choose yourself over and over again, even when no one is clapping. What about you? Have you ever walked away from something that once meant everything? Have you ever had to rebuild yourself from scratch because someone tried to erase your worth? I'd love to hear your story. If this video touched your heart, drop a 1-inch in the comments, or let me know where you're watching from. And if you didn't like it, I still welcome your thoughts. What spoke to you, what didn't, and how we can grow together. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more real, heartfelt journeys like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our community. We're just getting started. Thank you for being here.